Right, Michael Kennaugh.
You can talk right to me.
Okay, Michael Kennaugh, painter out of Houston, Texas, and we're here in the studio this morning. I'm a painter, sculptor. I designed and built this studio in 2005. I built it on the first floor of my home, so the concept was the first thing I see when I enter the house is my studio, and the last thing I see when I leave for the day is my studio. I wanted to live with my work, to be more involved, and to be where it's inseparable from my life. In a more intimate way. So if any ideas I have at 2 or 3 in the morning, I can descend upon the studio, do a little adjustment here and there. And I think there's something about that growing closer to the work. And yeah.
Growing up, was there a specific point, or did you always know that painting was going to be a part of your life, or being an artist was going to be a part of your life?
Well, interesting. I was thinking about becoming a veterinarian when I first went into college and realized that biology and all that wasn't my forte. But I drew my entire life, and I never really met a studio artist before, being from Beaumont, Texas. Not too many of those guys around, men or women. And I finally got into commercial illustration my first year at Lamar, and I got a part-time job at a large firm for a summer and trying to work on an ad campaign. At the end of 3 months, I maybe did 2 or 3 lines. Totally bored, totally hated the whole situation. So then I was really worried about my future. My painting teacher at the time set me up for that job. And I came back telling him that I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I think he knew that I wouldn't do well. And I decided right then and there, maybe the fine arts was where I should go. So real panic set in, thinking, how am I going to make it in this world? But realize that if you immerse yourself into your practice and make it your singular focus, that's the best chance that you can have at any kind of modicum of success. So at the age of 21, I turned to painting, and it's been my path ever since. So it's just what you do as a child. I just couldn't believe that you could actually keep doing this in your adult years. And what has provided me in my life has been a bountiful experience of all good things in life. And it constantly changes. There's no ending to being an artist. It's constantly unfolding. It's a very organic process. And I'm just fortunate to be doing what I'm doing.
Talk a little bit about the medium you paint on and your process of starting and working through your paintings.
I realized that you have to really rely on your strengths as an artist. That's the closest thing you have in your DNA as to what you tend to be best at. And for me, drawing was always a passion. And I always figured that if I could keep drawing in the forefront of my work, drawing provides the paint for something to hang on to. Drawing provides a new sculptural edge when I'm making sculptures. It's the structure of all my work. And so I tend to make 25 to 30 paintings in about 2 years' time. The drawings here behind me are called time studies. And these drawings are 4 years old. There's really no ending to them. But if I find myself bogged down in painting or sculpture, I return to these drawings, and after several hours of working on them, kind of a meditative process, I can look up from my drawing table across the room and see these paintings, and I know immediately what to do, what adjustments I need to make. So I realized that these drawings are like a clearinghouse for my mind. I don't have to worry about color, don't have to worry about surface, and it's kind of getting back down to the foundation of, for me, what painting is about. So it's a very important process that I do. I tend to work at 20 to 25 paintings at a time, all at the same time, along with sculptures. And what I find that they begin to build a story, because all my work is time-based. It's a reaction to my life. It's a reaction to the people that are in my life, conversations, events that happen. And so they are set up really as a diary, really, in spirit. Sketchbook is used to collect titles. They can be conversations I'll hear from other people, street signs, lyrics to songs. I write them down in my sketchbook and I kind of put it away and forget about it. And after 2 years of working, I find that these paintings or the titles can be applied to the paintings. Like I think there's a subconscious experience of knowing and writing down a word play. Those stick into my mind as again, a story or a diary that is recorded over 2 or 3 years, making a body of work.
Is there a preferred size you like to work in, or is there something that you try to stay away from, or something that you gravitate towards?
I tend to work on all different types of sizes, anywhere from 6 to 10 feet square, all the way down to maybe 9 by 12 painting. I like to work in various scales. Various scale of work, it tends to push me and challenge me more so. Also, the smaller works you can work rather quickly, figure out compositional problems, which then feed back into the larger works. And sculpture also has helped solidify my paintings. Just the tactileness of working on wood with paint, having these more solid forms versus what paint can do, dealing with more illusion of space. The sculptures are hard, they're tactile, they're physical, and that also helps me feed my visual mind into making the painting. So over time, everything has kind of laced together in a more tighter visual way.
So we're going to have some of these paintings in, and then also these sculptures here.
Yeah.
How did you get to, was that just a natural extension of your drawing and your painting, or how did you come to
Sculpture?
start doing sculpture?
Yeah, interesting time. I began to make these kind of inlays, what I called them. And I would take a piece of plywood and draw the composition out, cut it out, take the pieces out, cover them with metal or paint or canvas and stick them back together. So they're like a jigsaw puzzle away. And they were more textural studies. I made them for a couple of shows, maybe for about 10 years, and then I put them away. I revisited them maybe about 8 years later, and I realized that once I took the pieces and stood them up, I no longer needed the frame, and they become much more 3D. And then learning how to attach them, either notched or incised or penetrated forms, get them to stand up on their own. And I was really taken with now they're standing up in 3D, and in the air, the space around the shapes were equally as important as the material themselves. And so it became a practice of mine that has kind of grown and expanded in ways that I never saw myself as a sculptor, but I think I found my way being a painter, keeping again drawing as the forefront of my work to realize the more sculptural forms that can arise out of painting and drawing.
You operate out of Houston here. How has Houston been a help for your career or the art scene here? Are there other people that you use as sounding boards?
Yeah,
Just operate solo.
Yeah, I tend to, there was a time there when I had a couple of shows with my first gallery, and then she lost her gallery. She went to more commercial placement, and so I was without representation, which in a very strange way, I felt kind of free. Now I could stretch and experiment and do what I wanted to do without having to worry about another show. So I shut my studio down and wouldn't let anybody come in for the next 2 years. And during those 2 years, I really changed and became much more focused in my work. And I realized while I'm making work, I'd rather just be alone, not have anybody's input. I didn't want to be swayed by other people's opinions. I wanted to really seek out and pursue my work in a very solitary way. Houston's great because I grew up in this area, grew up along the Bolivar Peninsula in Galveston, and I've always connected with the kind of coastal environment, the kind of soft light the tension between landscape and the Gulf. And I knew that I was very familiar with it. And a lot of time artists, you have to make work that you know best about, paint what you know. And so returning to Houston, when I first came here, it was a fairly affordable city, always with a thriving art scene. And I found opportunity in an earlier warehouse that I purchased, and then eventually I built this place. I think it gave me a lot of opportunity in the early days to establish myself. And it's fairly, at least it was then, a fairly inexpensive place to live and work. And I'm only about 45 minutes from the coast. So it's really afforded me a lot of freedom in my work. And keeping a full-time job as I do, I still find time to keep a full studio cranking and producing. I don't think I would have these kind of opportunities had I gone to a bigger city like LA or New York, just to struggle to make a living. Here you can do it. It's different than it used to be 30 years ago, but it's still doable. Yeah.
Do you do any commission work?
I have. I did a large commission. I did 12 paintings for Macau in China, probably about 20 years ago, and that was interesting. It's something I'm open to, but it's a fine line you walk as to whether you can stay true to your work and not have to do too many adjustments according to the client. I'm certainly open to it, but it's almost like you want, in the best of all worlds, them to come to you rather than tailoring your work to meet.
When it comes to choice of color palette, what helps drive that? Is it your sketchbook, ideas and concepts that help drive the color palette, or how are you choosing that for your paintings?
Yeah, place is really important for me. And I don't think I'd be using this palette if I didn't live in Houston, Texas. I learned color management from a guy from the Isle of Man, and that's where my father is from. That's where the Manx cat comes from, the tailless cat. And my cousin, who was Speaker of the House at the time on the Isle of Man, introduced me to a guy named John Nicholson, who was in the Royal Academy of Watercolorists, a great painter. And John painted harbors and scenes of the Isle of Man, but they weren't paintings of like the Caribbean. They were paintings of like the North Sea. So very moody, gloomy paintings, gray greens, gray blues. And we spent an afternoon together. At the time, John was probably in his 80s, and I was maybe 22. And part of talking shop with another painter, you try to figure out his color palette. And I was always asking John, how'd you get this color? What are you doing here? And he told me one thing. He said, never clean your palette, which is the total opposite of what I was trained to always keep a clean palette, I was told. And John said, because once you don't clean your palette, you get these mixtures that you can never, ever reproduce. So it took a couple of years, and I realized later there's a conceptual component to that, in that your color can represent a period of time. It's not just a singular approach to the easel, but it's a generational mixes over many weeks and months. So I can do that to a degree with my oil paints. You do have to clean your palette every now and then. But I find that there's a second, third generation of mixtures that I can come up with that is very hard to replicate. And so color to me is a deeply personal thing. It reflects time and place. And again, time is so important in my work because it's like a diary. And time is how I build my palette. And time is how I adjust my drawings and paintings. And like de Kooning said, a painting never really ends. It just stops in interesting places. And Cezanne had said, I'm a painter of senses. I'm a sensory painter. And I think a lot of times I sense the way I should be painting. I sense these compositions because of what's happening in my life. So between sensing forms and structures through life's experiences, the palette is the same way. It's the same motivation of time.
You've intentionally chosen to build this workspace so you see stuff as you come and you go. Constantly on putting it back to the forefront of your mind. Any issues with releasing the painting and getting it out of here somewhere else? Do you have the bond of, hey, this has been a part of my life, I've seen this so many days in a row?
It's interesting. I don't ever look back. When you're making work, you're absorbed in it for 2 years. And I've been fortunate to have exhibitions so that then after 2 years, 25 or 30 works leave the studio for a project. Invariably, I'll have 2 or 3 paintings left behind that seem kind of odd. They don't quite fit with the body of work. Those 3 paintings that are left behind are usually seeds for the next body of work because they offer something different. I've discovered something along in the process of making, so I'm on to the next body of work. And so I have had one painting. It took about 9 years to complete. It was about the passing of my mother, and I gave it to the gallery, and I knew it was somewhat of an incomplete painting, but that kind of edge I kind of enjoyed because I was still dealing with the emotional loss. And so I thought, well, the painting also mimics what I'm feeling and the kind of discombobulating feeling of a parent passing. The gallery had it for about 3 or 4 years, and I saw it once again. I thought, can I have that painting back? I worked on it for another 4 or 5 years, so I worked on it for 9 years, and it was a big one. It was like 8 feet by 5 feet. It eventually found its own home. So that was one of the rare occasions where I did let something go a little too early and wanted to revisit it because I felt like I had become more sure about the way I felt about the loss, that I could reapply what I learned back into that picture. But usually I'm just charged straight ahead. I don't really look back. But it's always good to see a work later that you've done 4 or 5 years ago. It's like an old friend or a child that you'd raised. Yeah.
Along the way, what artists have inspired you in your works?
I'd have to say it's hard to avoid Cezanne. He's just a giant, and the way Cezanne worked, Gertrude Stein said, in this way, Cezanne nearly did, meaning that Cezanne would just abandon his works. He saw them as a moment of time of working, and then he would move on to the next one. Cezanne would leave his paintings in the countryside. When he got upset with them in the studio, he'd toss them out. They'd find them hanging in trees. He took, almost like the painting wasn't really the important thing. It's the process and being in the creative process. That's the important part. And I suppose paint, for me, that was kind of like, wow, the painting is really a residue of your experiences. So Cezanne is huge for me in structure, in the way he planned his life. And of course, Picasso is inescapable. I find a lot of times inspiration of looking painters and artists that lived 150, 200 years ago, Caravaggio, even more so, 500, 800 years ago. The way they applied their lives to their work. I have to say I don't really go into magazines. I don't really keep up with what's currently going on. There's so much in my own life that I'm trying to figure out that I kind of like the idea of isolation to a degree. But certainly the modernist, abstract expressionists are a lot of the painters that I look to. Alexander Calder is inescapable. What he did with movement and space and with sculpture is amazing. Giacometti would have to be another major influence. Where Giacometti went from surrealists, World War II happened, and then he goes back to his home and through Paris and seeing the burned out buildings and everything torched and burned, and then he comes up with his mature work, the tall, skinny figures, where mankind has almost been annihilated and you're left with this, with the most simplest of forms, right? Almost like a burnt matchstick. So it's those artists that their lives are really come back on them and reflect into work makes the greatest impact on me.
Before we went on, you had talked about taking the time to learn to draw the form and helping out with your work here. Can you walk me through a little bit about how learning that discipline has helped you in your work that you do today?
I think drawing builds an incredible sensitivity, and it's the most intimate thing you can do is take just a pencil and just make a scrawl, a mark on a piece of paper. It is for me, it's the essence, it's the basic foundation of everything I do. It's the armature for everything. And what it does, it builds a sensitivity to form, a sensitivity to relationships of unlike pairings that could be brought together and melded through spatial perceptions. It's very simple, but yet so sophisticated that I just felt that if I made that my main concern, no matter what I do with sculpture or painting, that it's all going to have the same language. It's all going to have the same proportion. It's all going to have the same look. Like Picasso said, you know, the Chinese and the way they made their scroll paintings, they would use one brush. And because they used only one brush, every stroke and every form had the same or similar proportion. You limit yourself with one tool in order to expand. So you simplify in order to expand. And that's what drawing does for me. It brings me back down to the essence of what I'm trying to do in order to discover multidimensional applications for my forms. And so I felt like as long as I stick with that, it hasn't failed me yet after 40 years of painting. So that, to me, that's everything. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your brushes? Does the type of paint you use, does that play an intricate part of anything that you do? Because like I said, I talked to other artists here, like, I buy the cheapest dang thing I can buy, and so it doesn't impede my work, and I'm always can pick up and run.
That's right.
So what's your philosophy on that?
Yeah, you some artists are really good about maintaining the brushes and keep them conditioned. I'm more of like a hardware store kind of guy, picking up rulers and the cheapest brushes you can find. I'm not very good at that, keeping my brushes nice and clean. And I realize it's more of a hassle to do so, very expensive as well. So I buy brushes by the boxes. You know, Lowe's is a great place to go. And really you learn to deal with your tools. Your tools are really extension of your mind and how you work and what you're inclined to do. So I use mostly Liquitex or Winsor Newton oil paints with a Winsor Newton painting medium. I keep it very simple. I don't throw in a lot of varnishes. And what I find is that the organic nature of painting, I'll start a painting and then walk away for a couple of days and it's changed. A painting continues to change whether I'm working on it or not. And it's almost like someone else had done the painting. And the reason why is because as you're working, there's different solutions of medium you use. So if a paint dries flat, then the form rises to the surface and confirm the canvas plane. If the paint dries as semi-gloss or gloss, then it can have an almost imperceptible depth. And it's this kind of push and pull between shapes and space that the painting itself continues to cure and shift on its own devices. And that's where I feel that emotional distance I have with my work, it's almost like someone else had done the painting a few nights before. And I think that allows me to make the necessary changes I need to do. A lot of times, the most precious parts of the painting, the most successful parts of the painting, you have to destroy that in order to push the painting forward. So the creative process is also a lot about sacrifice in order to push the painting forward, because as soon as I start saving the most successful parts of the painting will just begin to slide downhill. And that's something I've learned. So the medium itself is very organic in nature, and it continues to dry and shift in ways that's very unexpected. I find that very mysterious over time, that I have sometimes very little control over my own work, when it is very much about control with drawing. I find that as soon as you make a hard and fast rule of what your work is about, you can argue, well, it's not really about that. So again, in life, it has so many metaphorical issues of truth and myth, clarity, soft edge. Once you get into the work, it begins to unfold and almost mimic life itself. And as long as I find that my paint is generational mixes of time, I keep to drawing, all these components begin to build a body of work and kind of build a certain identity for myself as a painter.
What do you listen to when you work?
Wow. Well, Bob Dylan again is inescapable. When I first listened to Dylan, I'd find myself sitting in a chair not being able to paint because I'm so taken by his lyrics. They're just incredible stories. And from there, I kind of got into the band. I got into Cream. I listened to a lot of blues. I'm kind of a 60s, 70s kind of guy. So I'm just inspired by music. I mean, some of the poetry that comes in some of those lyrics to me, and I take that to heart too. You know, there's a reason why I'm listening to the blues, and there's a reason why I'm listening to Dylan. Some of the things they say is just timeless. The Allman Brothers, I mean, great band. And I find that this still applies to the way I'm feeling today. So yeah, I rarely paint in silence. It's a little bit too much pressure to work to make paintings anyway. So it has to have some levity in the studio. Yeah, definitely.
What do you do at the Art Museum?
I'm the senior art handler administrator for the Museum of Fine Arts. Been there for 30 years. I didn't want to take a job. I wanted my life to be all about painting. And there's a trade-off. Before COVID, we got to travel quite a bit. So I've been to Venice and London and Paris and Germany and Switzerland installing artwork and traveling with artwork. And there's a trade-off of seeing Starry Night Unframed put on a table and having loops looking at this amazing painting. And I wouldn't have those opportunities had I not worked at the museum. So I'm there for a lot of reasons, probably mostly selfish reasons, to mine those ideas from the greats. A Monet painting one time was being conserved, and it was vogue back then. If you owned a Monet painting in the mid-19th century, it was okay for you as an owner to work on it. If you didn't like the sky, you could change the sky if you wanted. So many years later, the conservators were stripping away the fugitive layers of paint. And embedded in this paint was a gnat. The day that Monet made that painting, Plein Air, a gnat stuck into the paint, and they discovered this gnat. And I just thought, wow, you know, it dispels a lot of the myth about painting when you realize these people aren't anything more than just mere mortals putting paint on canvas. And when you start to see the craft of painting over the centuries, it gave me a better idea about the history of painting, which my work is all about time and history. And it's really enabled me to grow as an artist in ways that I never even thought of. So it's been great.